Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for joining us today. And I was supposed to have David meet on today, and for different reasons, David's not going to be able to join us. But we are going to reschedule. But in lieu of David, I have a phenomenal guest, and he probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. He's my good friend. He's my co-host with the Leadership Podcast. It's Jim Vaselopulos.
Hey, Jan. How are you?
Hey, I love saying your name because I know how to say it, and most people don't. And so we've been co-hosts on the Leadership Podcast for 5 years through thick and thin, all kinds of different guests. And we also have an opportunity to be business partners and to do some training here and there for people. And one of the things that we've done a lot of is relationship selling. That's a module that we put out to people. And it's interesting, and the way we talk about it is it's not some new sales thing. It's really the latest in psychology and sociology and neuroscience and anthropology is kind of layered on top of all this. But it really kind of goes back to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, yep. Back to 1936. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And this is really oriented to leaders in organizations. And you often you use the analogy water, food, and oxygen. Could you, tell the listeners, the audience, a little bit about why you use that analogy, why sales is so important in the business world?
Well, when we're, I've had the good fortune to do some cool things with you, Jan. We've gone on crucibles and we've gone places where survival is something you think about. And if you talk to people about surviving in the wild, you can go 3 minutes without water. You can go 3 minutes without air, 3 minutes or 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. And that's kind of the rule of threes, they call it in survival when you're in the outdoors. In business, I think there's a similar rule of threes. And the first one is revenue. You can't go long without revenue. You have to have revenue. It's like the oxygen flowing through your body. Super, super important. The second one is sales. And you can't go long without sales, because if you don't have sales, you don't have revenue. The interesting thing about sales, though, it's a lot like drinking water. Many times we wait until we're dehydrated to drink. And by then it's almost too late. Same thing with sales. A lot of times we're like, oh, we're so busy, we can't sell right now. And then you forget to sell. And then you find out like, oh no, now we need sales and it's kind of too late. You're already dehydrated. And then the last one is operations or food. And we tend to kind of get all obsessed with operations and making things more efficient and making things, better, or we need to have more capability before we can go back and sell again because we don't want to screw something up. The reality is it's not that operations aren't important, but food is also important. But if I am dying of thirst, a steak doesn't help me. If I am gasping for air, a glass of water does not help me. So getting them in the right priority is really important. And I think that's one of the things that we often miss when we're looking at our priorities in business.
Yeah. And again, before we get into it, what are we hearing from the leaders when it comes to sales, business development, pipeline, demand creation? What is it? How do you hear that articulated in the clients you work with at Rofty Advisors?
Yeah, when it comes to kind of demand creation, a lot of times people are out there saying like, how can we get people to do things they don't want to do? And how can we go kind of like coerce people? And I think that's really kind of such a misnomer. It's the wrong way to look at the problem. It is a huge problem because demand is going to be what turns into tomorrow's revenue. But I think it's more a challenge to say, how do we find the people that want what we've got? So it's a little bit of targeting, a little bit of prospecting in the right places, and then helping people with something they already need. So it's really not as much convincing people to do something they don't want to do. It's helping them buy something they already have a need for.
Yeah. And, what I'm hearing as an executive coach is a lot of people, I've never heard someone say, my sales organization is firing on all cylinders. It is perfect. I've never heard that. What I always hear is, geez, my team's all over the board. they work the bottom of the pipeline. They're not putting stuff in the top, all kinds of different things. And, what's interesting to me is leaders, people look at a sales team and they try to manage it like it's a basketball team or a baseball team or something. And it's like, one thing a team has in common is a common purpose, a common objective, and they have to work together to accomplish it. The funny thing about a sales team is you have a bunch of individual contributors that all have individual goals. They don't have to work with other salespeople. They actually have to work with other people in the organization to get the sales done. But we treat them like they're a team. And I think that's one of the problems, is just from a structure and a mentality perspective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, if you kind of compare this to sports, and we've gotten so much more data driven with everything we look at in sports. And of course, people get compensated for their production and how many home runs you hit, or, how many goals you score. But the reality is, when you take a look at teams that win championships, let's forget about statistics. Let's talk about championships. They tend to get along well. They tend to have a lot of confidence. They tend to have a lot of fun. And what, I find in business is we get so data driven with our management that we're obsessing about, let's say, the metrics of, let's say, activity and production, that we lose sense of some of the more important factors that drive true success, which are confidence, which are the ability to be patient and, wait for things to ripen on the vine instead of trying to pluck them early, really trying to have the right calm perspective. Because at the end of the day, clients want to work with, and prospects want to work with, people who are confident, who don't make their hectic life more busy and more frenetic and more crazy. And salespeople need to be that warm blanket. And it's hard to be that warm blanket if someone is beating you over the head every day about how you didn't make enough phone calls.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show something, and you've never seen this, but you and I have worked together a lot. And I literally woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and ran down into this office and wrote it down. It just popped into my head. I just started going through the process. And we all know that everybody wants a certain amount of structure. They want to paint by the numbers. And I've been doing this a long time. And this is what popped into my head this morning. And I'll walk through each of these. There's a selection, approach, credibility, discovery, positioning, facilitate, time, delivery, earn, debrief. And I'll keep popping these up back and forth, but I'll go through each one of them one at a time kind of quickly. So my thinking on selection, again, we call that targeting. Mm-hmm. And targeting sounds pretty military, like I'm going to do something to you. And I thought, this is really a selection process at the very beginning. It's about which industry, which company, which person do I need to select to approach with my offering? What do you think?
I mean, I like the language change. I think it is selecting because it feels like the person on the other end is less of a victim. It's like I'm choosing you because we're a good fit for one another. Right. I think oftentimes in business, we're caught between these rock and a hard place where if I start talking too differently, it's hard for me to connect. But if we were to, let's say, go back in time and kind of brand, let's say, some of these normal sales things that, these sales terms we've got, I think selecting is a much better way to describe it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. The second one was the approach. And to me, it's really thinking about, well, geez, I've selected this person that I want to approach. What's the best way to approach them? I cold call them and dial them up. That ain't gonna work. If I have to work in this two-dimensional environment, what's the best way to approach them? I don't think oftentimes we take a step back and really go, well, what's the best way to do this? Oh, I'll blast out a bunch of emails and hopefully something sticks. What's your thoughts there? Do you think we're not giving enough time to how we approach once we've selected the people we need to?
I think the rationale we use to selecting the way we approach people is often very flawed. We often sit there and say, well, it's more effective. It's easier if I send a bunch of emails out. Okay. So
Yep.
it's easy for me to send a bunch of emails out. I can send out 1,000 emails at once instead of like making phone calls, which take more time. But the reality is what we have to look at is not what's easier, what's more effective. And we
Yep.
know through a lot of science and a lot of understanding of psychology that when I can get in front of someone face to face, when I can get in
Yep.
front of you and we have the tone of voice that we can use and the body language and everything else that goes into our facial expressions to help people understand the point we're trying to make and help people empathize with our position. It's so much easier with these things that are take more time. But a text is convenient, an email or a Slack is convenient, but it's not usually as effective. And so I think that's really where we make the big mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Convenience over effectiveness. And again, convenience for us, not for the person on the other end. To me, the third part of this is our approach works best when we have credibility. And to me, I was thinking about this, that credibility comes in three forms. One, we can be a thought leader. Two, we can have testimonials. Other people have said really nice things about us. Or we have a track record. If you were going to select a realtor to list your home, chances are you would try to find a realtor who has the best track record, who has the most listings. You want to be with people that are successful. So I think that's another thing that is often hard for sales professionals is, to really blend that confidence and that humility, to have that swagger, to put themselves out there. I don't think in the future you're going to be a successful salesperson if you are not a thought leader. Who wants to hang around with someone that's not passionate and an expert in their field and contributing?
Yeah, I think it's one thing. I mean, if you think of some of the interesting stuff that's happened over the past 20 years with the internet, it used to be like certifications and diplomas and things like that were so important. And, let's say, ratings were really important, but it came down to over time when things like Yelp came out and, reviews on, whatever store you're buying something from, where individual people and the volume of individual people matters. So you take a look at, it's not just like one restaurant critic saying your restaurant is good. It's 4,000 people saying
Right.
your restaurant is good. And I think
Yeah.
what we found is that there's some democratization about like your reputation that is really happening. So when we take a look at, let's say, your reputation, everyone's probably who owns a house has probably had that moment where they're like, does anyone know a good painter? And, you ask your friends and they say, oh yeah, we've got a guy. And, of course, then you find your good painter. I think that's going to become more and more important in sales is this someone you can trust? And how do I know I can trust them? It's not just because I know stuff. It's because you have a history and a track record of being the dependable, trustworthy person.
Yeah. And you're getting some thumbs up here, Jim, on the LinkedIn feed.
Cool.
Here's a question from Thierry Leroux. Don't you believe that too many people mix communication tools like phone calls, real meets, with tools made for exchanging information as emails, texts, and more?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think people aren't thinking about the communication mode they're using. There's, a concept I really like to throw out there when you're trying to select the right mode. I always want to go with the maximum amount of impact I can have. So,
Right.
as much as I can be face to face and stuff like that. But there are two types of communication modes. One where I give you the message and you receive it at the same time, which I would call synchronous. And then another one, which is asynchronous, where I craft a message, send it, and I don't know what mood you're in or how you're feeling when you receive it. If you don't know how someone is going to respond to the message you're sending, I always bias towards synchronous communication because I want to be able to change that message. I want to be able to understand if maybe today's not the best day to be talking about this. I can understand and get that feedback and adjust my message. But if you know exactly how someone's going to respond to something because it's just some transactional element of the sales process or any kind of communication process, then things like texting and Slack and email can work effectively. But being considerate of that is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The next point I had on here was number 4, which was discovery. And to me, that goes back to the acronym that I didn't invent, but I love, and that's MEDDIC, MEDDICC. What are the metrics? this is what we need to discover. What are the metrics? What's really important? What are they trying to solve? Who's the economic buyer? What's the decision criteria, decision process? Have you identified pain? Do you know who the champion is? And do you know what the compelling event is? MEDDICC. You can look those up on Google and get more explanation. But to me, the discovery is really about asking great questions to figure that out and to figure out where everything fits.
Yeah. I like that one. I'm going to push back a little bit on this one. I much prefer the word curiosity. And in large part because discovery, and especially MEDDIC, which I think is great. I'm not pushing back on MEDDIC at all. Those are questions I want to know as the salesperson. What I always want to do when we're talking about questions is what questions can we ask to help the prospect discover something, and if they're discovering something about my service or their needs, and they're getting a deeper understanding through the questions I'm asking, through my curiosity, and actually intriguing them with their curiosity as well, then I think that relationship really grows strong and it's more powerful. And through the course of that, you probably can get all those MEDDIC questions answered for you, but you don't have to go necessarily after them. You can kind of hear them as you ask questions about being curious about their problem and what they're seeking out of a potential solution.
Yeah, I like that. I like that shift instead of having discovery as the curiosity, because discovery is like I'm trying to figure out something with you instead of
it's about your needs.
Yeah, you're genuinely curious. I like that. That's a good one. The next one is, once you know all that, number 5 is positioning. And I think that's about positioning the gains. I learned early on that features don't speak for themselves, that you have to help people understand what the benefits are, what those, as our friend Christoph Morose would call what the gains are. Do you think that's the right time to start to talk about that? Your offering, your solution?
Yeah, I think, what the word that pops into my head is narrative, and there's like kind of a story arc with anything, any kind of engagement, any relationship, if you ask people about like, hey, how'd you meet? Tell us your story. And there's like a narrative that goes with it. Same thing happens with sales processes. And so part of that is positioning, but there's a lot more. And if the story just reads well and it sells well, and like you've got the ups and downs with that narrative arc, I think that becomes really, really powerful, because people like to understand the world in stories. And so as a salesperson, you're always trying to make sure that the story is good. And if you're crafting just a story that stinks, it's like watching 90% of the films that come out on Netflix every week. There's usually a few good ones. They have good stories. And then there's the junk that's like, why'd we watch that?
Right. Yeah. The predictable stuff. Yeah. Good. I like that. The narrative. And then I think that's the part where you start to really facilitate what we call the buying process. I mean, that's, all the players that you've already identified earlier, the economic buyer, the decision, the process, all that. But what you're trying to do is facilitate it, create momentum, and a little bit of gentle persistence to get to a close.
I always think of Jerry Maguire, like, help me help you. And we want to facilitate the buying process, and I think that's perfect. It's the right time and place.
Yeah, and then when you close, I think then I've got time in there, and this is more not part of the process, but for you to evaluate. Well, geez, how long did that take from when I selected somebody to the part where I closed? Because that's important, because time is money, and if we can compress the amount of time it takes to do that, there's something to be gained. I also look at our sales velocity, your sales velocity equation. At the very beginning is, selecting. Number 1 is all about numbers and work ethic. If we get to positioning or the narrative, that's really about, that can be about the dollars. And the facilitate is really about the percent of those that you select that actually close. So if we take those numbers, those variables, the numbers, the dollars, the percentage, and the time, then we've got a baseline from which to figure out, what can we do to improve, not just for our benefit, but the experience for people that are in our buying process that are experiencing whether our organization has something of of value to them.
Yeah. Time is important, and we tend to look at it like on an opportunity by opportunity basis, which totally skews our perspective on things. You got to look at time in much more holistic thing. It's like, where do I spend my time? Where do I invest
Yeah.
my time? When is the right time for them to buy? We have to work on their time frame. And so because we can't like say, hey, I need you to be ready now for me. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It needs to be ready for the buyer. It needs to be ready for the person on the other side. You have to invest your time wisely to make sure you've always got opportunities. You're always planting seeds and creating opportunities so that something's always coming through the ground. And if you can do that, then you become independent of time on individual opportunities. You can be more patient. You can be more understanding. At the same time, you can also be more judicious with how you spend your time to bring things to conclusion and understanding the value of sometimes a fast no. A fast no can be as valuable when you're selling as a fast close. And so time is really the major factor in sales success in many ways. Is if you can manage your time so that you're not desperate and you can allow other people to be calm and you can provide confidence, then you're going to be more confident and you're going to sell way more.
Yeah. And I'm just sending a note, reminding people if they've got questions, fire them away. We're glad to take those on.
We're game.
So then, the other thing I think that oftentimes we forget about is, deliver. And by this, I'm thinking of follow through and, in preventing buyer's remorse, that there's appreciation, there's something, even if you feel like you're, the hunter and you've thrown it over the fence, not your job, it is, to follow through, down the road, because that leads to number 9, which is you've earned the right to ask for a referral or a testimonial going forward. And again, I don't know about you, but I hate when somebody asks me for a referral or a testimonial as soon as I buy. Yeah. I mean, it's just awful.
It's too soon. It's too soon because it's like, I hate when you get on websites and they say, hey, I just bought the product. I haven't even worn the shoes yet, or I haven't even used this product yet. It's like, but I'm really happy because of the unboxing experience. It's like, that review is just plain stupid. Okay.
Yeah.
But if someone says, hey, I've worn these shoes for 3 months and they are my favorite shoes because of this, this, and this, fantastic. Okay. That's a much better credible review. But when we take a look at all this stuff, I always take it back to, and this, Jan, promises. If you're going to have a good reputation, you got to make promises and keep promises. But you're not just making personal promises like I'll call you on Thursday, or I'll follow up with this, or I'm going to send you a note about this, or the proposal is going to look like this. It's, what are the promises of the expected value of the product or service you're selling, and are they fulfilled? So if I'm setting an expectation as part of that narrative arc, okay, and I say, hey, this is going to be a funny movie, and then you get to the end of it, you're like, that wasn't funny at all. I'm not happy. It might have still been a good movie, but it wasn't funny. Okay. So what you need to do is make sure that you're managing the expectations and the promises that are kind of made in the story arc. And we've all seen that trailer for a movie that we thought was going to be, funny or cool. And then you watch the movie, you're like, that trailer was so misleading. I'm really pissed. And that's the responsibility of the salesperson.
Yeah, well, you just described half the movies on Netflix. I cannot get those 2 hours back. Yeah. So the last one I've got is the thing I think we could all do a better job, and that is take a step back and reflect and debrief. What went well, what didn't, what do I need to improve going forward? Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think too many people, we finish like college and then we stop learning. And, and we don't understand how important it is that feedback mechanism to learn and to really improve any craft or anything like that. We grow up with sports, we grow up in school, and everything's about feedback. And if you want to perfect a skill like sales, you need to not just wait for feedback, you need to seek feedback. You need to seek feedback from the marketplace, from your clients, from your peers, from your superiors. And I think some of the best sales experiences I've ever had were the coffees or the lunches right after a big sales call, where as a team, we discuss what happened, what went right, what went wrong, being very frank and honest with one another, not trying to hurt feelings, but saying like, hey, you know, you didn't need to make that statement. That was unnecessary. They were already sold. Or,
Yeah.
I think you missed the tone that they were having. They were struggling with something else than what you were hammering on. And so that feedback is what allows us to get better and learn.
Yeah. Yeah. The feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Jan. Yeah. So let me just throw this up again one more time, and just kind of recap. So again, as I looked at that this morning, I was just thinking, not so much from a salesperson perspective, but a sales leader that is trying to lead this process. And like you said, this is oxygen for the business. And it's real easy to basically say, hey, it's not working, and I'm just going to hammer. And if I yell and I scream and I pay attention to this more, things are magically going to happen. But you're talking about humans interacting with humans, very delicate relationships with lots of emotions involved, way more emotions than rational thinking.
Yeah,
we're looking at spreadsheets and we're trying to do this, and we're looking at pipelines instead of saying, you know what? There's a whole bunch of social interactions happening out there. And as a leader, just like I want my salespeople to facilitate the buying process, as a leader, I need to facilitate the sales process. I need to facilitate everything that happens in my company so that the people that are out there creating these relationships with other people feel supported, and that they know what the steps are.
Sales management is a tough thing, and sales leadership is a different thing. And I think too many times we get into sales management and, we're going to look at the metrics and we're going to, manage activity, and we're going to hammer people if they're not hitting expectations, and meeting expectations and getting people to be accountable is really important. But you got to understand this. And this gets to the more sales leadership, which I think is infinitely more important. When we take a look at sales leadership, salespeople need to be confident. They need to be emotionally sound, because people, if I were to sit here and say, hey, I want you to buy from me because I, really think we've got a great product. And, if I'm coming across like that, no one in the world will buy from me. Okay. Because I'm not confident. There's no passion. There's no confidence in what I'm selling. So part of the battle is to say, as a sales leader, is to say, we need to have people confident and happy. No one wants to talk to the happy, oh, how are you doing today? I'm doing okay. People want to say, hey, I want to talk to Jim because he's going to lift me up. He's going to make me feel better. We always have fun conversations. Buying is an emotional process, and we have to have confident, emotionally stable, comfortable people who can sell confidence and passion in their product and belief. And in many ways, we're selling belief. We need to manage the emotional state of our sales force more than we need to manage the activity. And how we manage the activity affects the emotional state of our sales force. And that's what people forget, sales management.
Yeah. It's funny, you and I've made jokes about, what makes people attractive. And a lot of times it's
this, right?
It's our ugly mugs. But, when I say attractive, that, somebody wants to work with you, do business with you. Confidence plays such a huge role. And if people are getting beat up at work, or diminished in any way, they are not going to represent your organization very well. As I guess the question I would throw out there, and we'll wrap this here in a second, Jim, and I'd love for you to throw out your big takeaway you'd like people to hear. My big one is to really look at your team and ask whether they're committed or they're simply compliant. And if they're simply compliant, the place you need to look is in the mirror. Yeah. So, your takeaway, Jim?
I think the big takeaway for sales leaders is, manage the confidence of your team. No one's going to buy from someone who's not confident, not arrogant, but confidence. And so, manage the emotional state and condition of your team. That is infinitely more important than the metrics. The metrics matter, but the metrics will come into play. They'll kind of happen if you have a confident team.
Yeah, good. Awesome. A few words on Rofty Advisors.
Yeah, if you like what you've heard, Jan and I do a ton of sales training together. We really enjoy it. Do work with a lot of companies. Rofty Advisors, RoftyAdvisors.com. If you go there, don't miss the library section where there's just a ton of free stuff that you can get. You can download about sales, like these cheat sheets I've got on relationship selling and sales velocity and other stuff. Good stuff there for you to get, all free.
Okay, cool. And I'd be remiss if I didn't let people know this book came out this week, compiled by Chris Payton over in the UK, a former guest on our podcast. Mm-hmm. And he had 20 people all write a chapter, and it went #1 on Amazon this week. So yeah, kudos to Chris and the whole gang, but it's out
kudos
on Amazon.
To you, Jan.
And yeah, that one chapter I wrote, it did it.
It's the best one.
It's the best one. No, they're all good. So, with that, everybody, again, we appreciate you joining us today. And if you've got topics that you'd like us to cover in future LinkedIn Live, we're on about twice a month. And in the meantime, have a great rest of the week. And thank you, my friend Jim.
As always, Jan, thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.